Well, first, it makes sense for governments to focus their efforts to spur innovation in areas where the commercial incentives for innovation are lower than their social value, and funds are limited then in the areas where the gap is biggest. So that, as we discussed earlier, that could be because there's a market failure, perhaps because of externalities from use of the good, or because the innovation is easily copied. So that's when it makes sense to try to increase support for innovation. When should you use pull mechanisms? Well, one criteria is that it has to be possible to measure success. We need a metric or indicator that you can link payment to. So my favorite example of something where it really wouldn't have been possible to devise a pull mechanism would be the Post-it note. I think that's an extraordinarily important invention. I use it all the time. But we didn't know that we needed a Post-it note until somebody developed it. So you couldn't have developed a pull mechanism for that. I think pull mechanisms can be applied both to technologically close, near to market problems, as well as more ambitious, technologically distant targets. But I feel like pull mechanisms are particularly useful for technologically distant targets, including targets where there's actually disagreement about the technological feasibility, because they provide a large incentive for solving the problem, which is only paid out if the target's met. So, if the target isn't met, the funder doesn't pay. So sometimes there's political controversy over, is this approach going to work? And maybe, there can be that political element seeps over to the funding decisions. Well, you don't need, if there are different people with different views on an issue, the government doesn't necessarily need to decide, is this technologically feasible? A philanthropic funder doesn't need to decide whether it's technologically feasible. They can put the reward out there, and then the firms that think it's possible, they'll put their money into it, and the firms that don't think it's possible won't try.